Lord, you said when a man of peace comes, then welcome him. And I know that Stephen is a man of peace. All over his representation of his life, he's a man of peace. So I pray you would just bless us now with this man's ministry as he just speaks those things to us. Amen.
Thank you, Father. Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning.
It's a great pleasure to be here this morning. Feel at home. It may be a small church, although you're not that small. By some standards, you've clearly got a big heart, and that comes across. And loving being here. Here to talk about Tear Fund. I don't actually work for Tear Fund. I'm a volunteer speaker. I have another life, another role. Come from Sherborne, although I'm very familiar with this area. Lived for many years in Blandford. Came over to Wareham on many an occasion. My son used to play for the rugby club. So I'm very familiar with this area, and it's lovely to be here. Can I just start maybe with a bit of a quiz? Yeah? You like quizzes? Yeah? Good, you like quizzes. Any historians amongst us this morning? There's we'll put this to the test. Okay.
So long as it's about a 20-year period between 1640 and 1660.
You might be out of your depth. Just raise your hand if you've got an answer to any of these questions. So don't shout out the answers. I just want to know whether you know, and we'll see whether you know at the end. What was the year that Boeing first introduced the 747 jumbo jet? There's one man. We'll see whether you're right. Now then, anyone remember the Ford Anglia? Wow. What was the year that the Ford Escort came in to replace the Ford Anglia? That was a black day, probably. Hands going up. All right, something for the techies. When was the first manned spacecraft orbiting the moon? All right, anyone for football? It was the year that Manchester United won the European Cup final, becoming the first English team to do so. That man he's on a winner. For the gardeners, it was the year that they broadcast the first episode of Gardener's World. All right. Shout out if you know the year. Those that put your hands up.
68.
Anyone else? 70? 63? 60? 68? Give him a Mars bar. Well, why do I mention that? It happens also to be the year that Tear Fund was started. 50 years ago. There was a reason for that, wasn't there? 50 years ago, Tear Fund began. We read in Leviticus 25 that the 50th year had great significance, didn't it? It was the year of Jubilee. According to that law, the 50th year was the year when there was restoration, a good way of life in which God redeemed, liberated his people, that his people could once again flourish. The land was restored, debts were forgiven, slaves were set free in the year of Jubilee. And it's wonderful. We'll come back to that. In the last 50 years of Tear Fund's ministry, through the help of, and I know that you support Tear Fund, through the help of churches like yourselves, and it couldn't happen without churches like yours, countless individuals and communities across the globe have experienced restoration, freedom, equality, justice, just as God intended his people should do. You know, in the last 10 years alone, for those who like figures, the last 10 years alone, through the work of Tear Fund, supported by churches like yours, there have been 154,000 churches have been envisioned and empowered to do something about their own communities across the globe. Tear Fund only works through local churches. It's unique in that respect. It partners with you and it partners with the churches on the ground to do the work. Through that partnership with that 154,000 churches, new churches, adding to the number that already exist, it's estimated that 32 million people have been impacted. Those churches then go out and impact their communities, who impact their nation. Don't know how they get these figures. I'm just reading what I'm given. I'm trusting it, you trust me. Not only that, but Tear Fund believes in campaigning, changing unjust laws, unjust practices. And in that 10 years, they reckon that some 300 local, national and international policies have been changed to bring about justice, to bring about God's plan. And Tear Fund also, as well as development work, has helped some 13 million people through disaster relief in that 10 years. All through the support of churches like yours. You know, in 1990 it was said that the United Nations reckoned in 1990 there were 1.9 billion people on the earth living on less than $2 a day, £1.55 a day. 1.9 billion. That's 26 times the population of the UK. Can you imagine that? All living on less than $1 or $2 a day, which they've got to pay their rent, they've got to clothe, educate, feed, provide medication. $2 a day. 1.9 billion. That was in 1990. Through the work of organisations like Tear Fund, and not exclusively Tear Fund, in 2015, these are United Nations figures, that figure has dropped to 702 million. Just 10 times. It's still 10 times the population of the UK. But it's dropped in that time, since 1990, to just 702 million. So progress is being made. You can very often feel this is such a dark picture, it's just getting worse. It isn't. The United Nations goal is to end extreme poverty, and extreme poverty is where people are living on under $2 a day. The United Nations goal is to end extreme poverty by 2030. And it's achievable. It is actually achievable. It's extraordinary, isn't it? Is that good news? Yes. It's good news, isn't it? The number of people living in extreme poverty across the globe has halved. And in countries where Tear Fund is working, millions of people have been lifted from material and spiritual poverty through the work of local church partnerships. Because that is the unique thing. I'm going to take a jumper on. It's warming up, isn't it? That's the... Oh, yeah. Thank you. That is one of the unique distinctives of Tear Fund, is that it's not just interested in physical poverty, but it's interested in spiritual poverty, as was Christ. And at Tear Fund we believe that an end to extreme poverty is possible. And as the slogan on this leaflet that you had says, Tear Fund won't stop, we won't stop until poverty stops. Jesus said, I have come that they may have life and have it to the full. And of course he only meant people in Wareham, didn't he? He didn't, did he? He meant everyone. I have come that they should have life and have it to the full. John 10:10. I've got 4 children. You'll be amazed to know I've got 3 grandchildren. I don't look old enough, I know, but I have got 3 grandchildren. When my children were growing up, if they were ill, I expected to be able to call a doctor and make them well. When they were hungry, I rustled up a meal or took them to McDonald's or wherever. Education, it wasn't a case of will they have an education, it was a case of where are the best schools? What are the SATs results? What's the Ofsted reports say? As they grew up, I expected to be able to clothe them as they grew out of their clothing. I expected my children to have a future, have hopes, plans, dreams, aspirations. We expected them to thrive, not just survive. Sadly, still for 702 million people, that is all they can do, is survive. 10% of the world's population, all that I've just described for my children, and I'm sure that it's exactly what you would aspire for your children and your grandchildren. I'm no different. For so many people in the world still, even though things are getting better, still they don't have those aspirations. Imagine every night putting your child to bed hungry. I can't. I've never done it. Have you? I don't know what it's like. Sadly, there are people in this country who do. I believe you run a food bank here. There are people who know what that's like, or live in the fear of it. Imagine not being able to get basic medicines when your child's ill, or not being able to send them to school, but knowing that there is better, but being powerless to do anything about it. A life revolving not around thriving, but one about surviving. Yet Jesus said, I have come that they may have life. And life in all its fullness, in abundance. Not just survival life. Life. Jesus intended that people should thrive, not survive, didn't he? Anything less is not God's will for anyone. Anyone. In Luke 4 we read of Jesus saying, the Spirit of the Lord is on me because he has anointed me to preach good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners and recovery of sight for the blind, to release the oppressed, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favour. And we can look at that huge number of people living on under $2 a day and we can think, whoa, too big a problem. What can I do and wear them? In 1 John 3:17, a most challenging verse, it's always challenged me. If anyone has material possessions and sees his brother in need, but has no pity on him, how can the love of God be in him? Isn't that one of those texts that you rather would just not be there? But it's there. How can the love of God be in him? And I know that you as a church do have that response in your heart when you hear of these things, because you already give. And it's always presented with such a difficulty. It's always better, isn't it, to light one small candle than to curse the darkness. So what you do in Wareham is lighting many candles, but not just sitting back and say, this is not my problem, it's too big. That story which you're all familiar with of feeding the 5,000. Where shall we buy bread for all these people to eat? Philip answered, 8 months' wages would not buy enough bread for each to have a bite. Is that how we feel about the injustices in the world, not just abroad, but on our doorsteps? What can I do to affect the lot of all these people? Yet we know, don't we, that Jesus took the boys' 5 loaves and the 2 fishes, and a miracle followed. Jesus came to have life, to give life, spiritual life, eternal life. He was concerned for everyone's spiritual and eternal welfare, but also for their physical welfare. There's a proverb in the African country of Chad which says, hungry people have no ears. There's no point preaching the gospel to someone who's hungry. Those who are starving can only think of the next meal and where it's coming from. And that's where Tear Fund's work comes in. Tear Fund doesn't just go out to these countries and preach the gospel. It demonstrates the gospel. It gives people something to eat. It gives people a hope. It gives people back their dignity, so then they can hear the message of the gospel and receive spiritual life as well as physical life. Poverty robs, doesn't it? It robs. As churches in the UK, we might not be able to affect the whole nations, but we can affect that, can be part of God's work in transforming